You are.
Yeah, reluctantly, but I am getting better at it. Okay, so we're going to say welcome to everybody. Now that we're recording, we're going to go about all things addenda today. All things addenda. So before I do share my screen, I want to ask you guys who just joined us. We've been having a conversation here. What is allowable? What kind of language is allowable? Here's the first question. Is an agent, a real estate agent, realtor or non-realtor, allowed to write an addenda? Anybody?
Yes.
No.
No.
I love you though. Thanks for participating. Yes, because the problem is when you write an addenda, you're practicing law without a license. We are not lawyers. And as such, if we practice law without a license, that's a third-degree felony. So as I was sharing to my group over here, I look terrible in orange. So I will never practice law without a license. But we are allowed to be a scribe, okay? And that is the big difference that you always have to remember. What is a scribe's job? Simply writing down in terms that are clear and concise for everybody what the buyer and seller are agreeing upon, which is why if I'm ever going to go rogue and write some additional language in a contract, I will always start it with buyer and seller agree. Or if it's in a listing agreement, it'll be broker and seller agree. But that's a very simple way to say we're all in agreement here. And this is what we're agreeing upon, right? We can write that because all we're doing is making it clear and putting it down in writing so everybody sees it and can sign it. These are the things that we're agreeing to. But as soon as you start going, this contract isn't contingent upon and blah, 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 you're sounding like an attorney, in which case you would need a license to actually practice law to write that. Just while we're at it, can we write a lease?
No, we can only fill one in.
Thank you. Mr. Tony's never going to get me in jail for that.
Can I extend a closing date?
We can only write down what buyer and seller agree. So Rainey, if Mr. and Mrs. Seller and Mr. and Mrs. Buyer all agree that we're going to extend it, absolutely, buyer and seller agree the closing date shall be extended to blah, 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 right?
Okay, because I'm just extending my closing from today to tomorrow.
Excellent. So you're writing an addendum. But these are things that I want you guys to keep in mind. Make it as simple. You know, it's like the KISS analogy. Keep it simple, stupid. So important in an addenda. If you ever call the legal hotline, I'd love you to ask them, can I write an addenda? They're going to go crazy. They hate that question. Oh my God, no, you're practicing law without a license. You need to be a scribe. Did you write that addenda? Yeah, don't ever like admit to that to anybody from the legal hotline group. Yes, so the reality is we are just writing down what everybody's agreed upon. One other thing I will throw out there, some attorneys believe, I don't know about your husband, Teresa, maybe you could chime in if this is his thought, but some attorneys believe that realtors shouldn't even be maintaining and keeping track of timelines. They feel that that's beyond our duty. I disagree with that because our job is to be making sure the transaction closes. And therefore, if we're transaction brokers, we have to be watching the timelines, right? Because how else can we keep a transaction moving if we're not guarding those timelines? But that is, some attorneys believe that that should only be done by an attorney. And you know what? If you're up in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, many states, that's what happens. As soon as you find a buyer, you give it over to an attorney and the realtors are out. But not here in the state of Florida. And that's why it's really, really careful that we all understand what our duties are, what we're allowed to say, and what we're not allowed to say, which is where I'm really talking about this addenda class today, because I have seen some crazy things written in contracts, and it's just not good, guys. For example, I know nobody in this room, nobody on this Zoom has ever said the home will appraise, right? Because I've never seen that written. Let me ask you, what does that mean, the home will appraise?
This means that the appraiser's going to do his job. Nothing.
Yeah, it's going to appraise, but for what? I don't know. What happens if it doesn't? I don't know. By when? They can appraise it after closing, right? Like, you didn't have any details in there. This is why we can't go rogue and write in the home will appraise. Even if you wrote the home will appraise for purchase price. Okay, great. And it doesn't? Now what? There's no language that says that the buyer will be able to get their money back, right? But that's in the addenda, and that's why we have one. So we're going to share our screen here. First, we're going to talk about a couple other fun things. And you guys know if you have anything you want to talk about, feel free to jump on. Let me just go ahead and get this. All right. First, we're going to look at This is the as-is contract. See, oh, as-is, it's right on top of it. We need to do that. Oh, this is really slow. Can you guys all hear me still? We good?
Yep.
Yes.
It's interesting that this works better here than in Lake Nona. Maybe it's just less people. This is a residential contract. You can tell, more pages, right?
Dr. Phillips might be better than Lake Nona, just saying.
Listen, I can't agree to that. I can't. They're
Shots.
all my heart. I can't. Okay. So the contracts, the as is or the FAR bar, right? Or the residential, they're both FAR bars. So first things first, let's just take a quick peek down here. You guys see this Florida Realtor / Florida bar. It is imperative that you always check that when you're picking out your addenda, because when you go into .loop and you go under Florida Interactive Forms, that is where we are kept abreast of all the new changes, all the new contracts, anything that Florida Bar is putting out. With that said, what happens is, let's make sure nobody's joining. I'll put this over here. You can see every addendum they've ever written. We have another contract written by a different group of attorneys called the CRISP, CRSP. The CRISP contract is actually used a lot in Northern Florida. We don't really use it here. I've seen it 1 or 2 times. To give you an overview general, the CRISP is more like the residential contract, but this is the problem. It's not the same. And so therefore, if you're using an addendum that on the bottom says CRISP, it doesn't match the contract that you used. So a lot of times you create conflict between the contract and the addenda. And where this gets really messy is that the addenda always supersedes the contract, right? So if the contract had better protections in it, which that's my point, if you're using a regular residential contract, there's better protections in that than in the CRISP. And now you take a CRISP addendum and you override it, right? You override the other contract. You could negate some of the really good safety things that are in that Florida residential contract because you now had a superseded addenda that refers to language from a different contract. Follow me?
So does that
Yes.
write it in additional terms or?
No, that means that when you're searching for the addenda, we're going to show you how to search and find to know if it's a CRISP or if it's a, as a matter of fact, let's pull it up. Let me see. I mean, this bar thing is in my way. You guys see that? It's like, get out of my way. Okay, let's just open another .loop file. So let's say I'm going to look for a .loop file. And okay, here's another, this is a trick. It's not really a trick, it's a tip. We'll call it a tip. The as is and the residential, because they're both written by Florida Realtors, these addenda that they are showing on the last pages here are all the same. You see what I'm saying? The condominium rider says condominium rider there. And if you go over here, it says condominium rider. They're exactly the same, right? The defective drywall is the same here and here. The wording is the same. That is exactly the terminology when you go into .loop you want to look for. So if I go here and I go to templates, right? Where do I find every addenda ever written? It's down here under Florida Interactive Forms. So if you don't highlight that, guys, you're not searching that. That's the one thing in .loop that's kind of a little annoying. People are like, I never find anything in .loop. It's because you didn't actually highlight the folder you're searching. So once you highlight that, you start to write condo. And you'll notice you get a bunch of things, right? So if you hang over here, you see this? This says FAR bar in the end. You guys can see that? This one says nothing. Come on, play nice. Oh, it's the internet, so slow. Okay, see, there's FAR, so we know that's ours. Here's another one. I can't see it there. We have to maybe open that one. Receipt of condominium duct. So it'll tell you, this one says it right here, CRISP. You see this? Condo Association Addendum, CRISP, CRSP, instead of FAR bar. So you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate one. This is FAR bar. See, this one's FAR bar, this disclosure, this addendum is a CRISP. Totally different. So you want to make sure you never use the CRISP ones. You only want to use the FAR bar ones. Okay. Now, I don't always like to pull everything out and have them in other folders because what's great about using Florida Interactive Forms is it's being uploaded for us by Florida Realtors. So when they put into Form Simplicity and they put into Transaction Desk and they put it into the slew of whatever ones that they're passing out to other boards, right? We're getting a direct feed. So if they've made a change, the most up-to-date forms for anything that they have is in Florida Interactive Forms, which is why I don't try to take everything out, right? And put it into folders. I will put a lot of things into folders, but then it becomes kind of a little bit of a hassle for us to maintain with the dot loop to make sure it's always the most current forms. Follow me? So that's why I personally think addenda especially, I'd rather get them from Florida Interactive Forms than have to constantly be updating them. Clear on that. So we all know how to search for it. We all know not to get the CRSP, wrong ones. We want the ones that say FAR bar. Okay. So now let's go back here and I want to point out another thing. So this one is the residential contract, right? And this one is the as is. You will notice all of them are the same except for there's two. K and L on the as is reserved. I've heard some interesting things about what reserved means. Does anybody want to share what they think reserved means? Anybody? Christine's like hiding back there. I'm not talking about it.
Is it just the whole places so that way the letters are the same whether you're using your crisp versus the other one?
You were doing so great until you said crisp. You're exactly right. It's the whole places whether you're using an as is.
As is, I mean,
Residential.
yeah.
Yes,
As is,
absolutely right. Reserved does not actually mean that there is an addenda called reserved. There's no reserved addenda, right? So notice on a residential contract, they have an as is addenda and a right to inspect / cancel. That is not an availability as a selection in an as is contract. Does anybody know why?
Well, you wouldn't need an as is addendum if the contract is as is. And most people who are getting an as is sale, they're just not gonna, inspecting the houses and gonna be part of the transaction.
Thank you. And Mr. Rafe got here too. You just were able to catch him quicker. He beat you by a second. But absolutely right. That is what an as is contract is, right? It's as is, and they have a right to inspect, but also a right to cancel, because the difference between the regular residential and the as is residential, bless you, is that right to cancel due to inspection. Remember, when you have a regular residential contract, you do not have a right to cancel because of inspection. You don't. You have an agreement that you've decided how much money the seller is willing to pay for general warranty items, WDO, and permits. Now, if the costs exceed that, and these are not cosmetic, they're actual working order, working condition items, and they are written in by the appraiser wrote in must repair or replace, and it goes beyond those limits, now we get to negotiate, right? And if we can't come to terms, the buyer may cancel and get their money back. But that's not a right to inspect / cancel. A right to inspect / cancel has the language like in a vacant land contract. A vacant land contract has something called a feasibility study, right? And what it says is that the buyer can take a certain amount of time. It's 30 days is the typical, right? Where they can study the land in any which way they want to. Environmentals, they want to do perk tests, they want to whatever they want to do. But they can decide in their sole discretion, that language is very clearly used. If the property is not right for them, they can cancel and get their money back. So that's essentially what they added into an as is. The buyer may inspect, doesn't have to. Doesn't say that the inspector has to be licensed, doesn't say anything. They may inspect, and they have 10 days, 5 days, 7 days, whatever, within their sole discretion to determine if the property is suitable for that. That is a cancel for any reason clause, my friends. You do not have a cancel for any reason clause in a residential contract. So let me ask you, if you have shared with your seller all the great reasons why they would maybe want to consider using a residential contract, you have a residential contract, you write in the MLS, the seller is only requesting residential contracts, not as is. You get a residential contract and it comes with an as is and a right to inspect. Do you accept that? Heck no, because now the buyer has their cake and gets to eat it too, and the seller lost all the advantages of being in a residential contract. But they're held to a higher standard themselves now, right? Because the great thing about the as is they're saying they're not going to do anything. Now, whether they decide to do it or not, right? But in the residential, they already agreed they will. It's terrible, right? The other thing that is great for a seller in an as-is contract is that if there's any permitting issues, that's on the buyer. The buyer has to find it. The buyer has to clear it. The buyer has to pay for it. The seller does nothing. All they do is give them access to the property, give them any plans if they have them, that's it, right? So fabulous for the seller. But if you took a residential contract and then took those two addenda, guess what you just did? Now, the seller still has to cure any permit issues and this buyer can get out for any reason. So let me just say one more time, never, never, ever, never, never, ever, ever, never, accept an as-is or a right to inspect / cancel if you are using a residential contract. You just killed the point of the residential contract. Now,
But if the
contrary,
seller
if you're
wants to-
representing the buyer and you want to throw them in, listen, all power to you, right? You just gave your buyer that have your cake and eat it too clauses, right? But if you're on the sell side, you never want to allow your seller, because then you might as well just come in as is contract, right? Because here you're obligating them to more and the buyer is getting all the opportunity to cancel and get their money back. Any questions on those? I really don't want to look at them because I really don't like them, but we can look at them if you want to. But my suggestion is, most importantly, never ever accept them if you are using a residential contract and you're representing the seller. Everybody clear?
So if someone's like, bent on that, you just say, send me an as-is
Yep.
contract.
Absolutely. Tracy says if somebody's hell bent on that, you say, send me an as-is contract. Absolutely.
But then you're not tied to any.
Because now, especially permits are on the buyer again, right? You don't have to say, so fine, if you want an as-is, that's fine. We can do an as-is contract. We're not going to do a residential contract and make it as is for you. No, because it's only making it as is for the buyer, not for the seller, right? It's horrible.
But that's the seller's call, right? We can advise all we want, but if they want-
Absolutely, absolutely. Listen, we don't get to make any calls unless you happen to be the seller yourself, right? But all we can do is explain to the seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, remember the reason why we chose to use a residential contract, that you decided you wanted to have the opportunity to make them get their inspection, to make sure that if there was something wrong within the limits that we've already set, if it had to do with working condition, that you would repair those. Remember we talked about all that? What this does is it negates all that. You still have to hold up your end of the bargain, but they can still cancel for any reason. They don't even have to have an inspection. Let me ask you, what seller, if you explain it like that, is ever going to say, oh, sure, let me take that too? And if they do, desperate. But if they do, then I would suggest, Mr. Seller, if you really want to take this, that we go back to them and we ask them to put the contract on an as-is contract. And that way you're not held to a higher standard when the buyer's given the get out of jail free card. How do you, right? Because that's what's happening here. You know what I mean? Okay. So condominium rider, we all looked at that just a moment ago. The condominium rider, remember, has a crisp and it has a far bar. Okay. What is a condominium rider? Anybody? Let's go take a quick peek at one. Condominium rider.
It's the disclosure for a condominium that you have to do in addition to the HOA.
Thank you so much, Jules. Yes, and let me point out a couple things. Now, these are all in our condo listing folder, but notice something here, guys. Seller's disclosure for condo. If you have a condominium, you cannot use a regular residential seller's disclosure. The reason is because this condominium seller disclosure talks about things that are different in a condominium. Most importantly, does anybody know the biggest difference between a condo and a townhome? Anybody? Come on,
First
someone go.
First of all, you don't need a survey because obviously you're just selling air. And depending on the townhome and how the townhome is deeded, it's the same thing goes with the survey and then the sharing the walls and hold on, common area. The roof, there was something else. What was it? I forgot.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
I live in a townhouse that is deeded as condo. So let me just tell you, it's a bitch. Oops, sorry. So there is an awful lot of differences on the condo because even though it's a townhouse, but it's deeded as condo because of the roof, the association, is it voting rights? There is
So let me share with you, you're doing great. Now I'd have to look at your documents to see, but the reality, the truth of a condominium is you only own from the sheetrock in. The sheetrock out, which oftentimes is plumbing, big electrical, things of that nature, that is owned by the association, which your ownership, you do have ownership, but as an association, right? So the ownership cost is shared amongst the association. But you as an actual homeowner only own from the sheetrock in. Your appliances are yours, right? But really the bigger ticket items are not yours. The roof over your head is owned by the association, but also the ground below you and any common areas are owned by the association. In a townhouse, you actually own the land you sit on. You own that land. Oftentimes the roof is still common, right? Because it's shared amongst multiple dwellings and you have a shared wall, but everything from that wall, you know, the hard wall, the rest of it, the walls, the plumbing, anything in your walls is yours. You own that, but not in a condominium. So it's really important that people understand when they're buying a condominium, they're not just buying the space within those four walls, right? They're buying the association. That's why the seller's disclosure talks a lot about the condominium association as a whole. What are their reserves like? I mean, right? They decide that they want to paint all the buildings, change the landscape and do all these things. You, if it's voted in, have to pay for it, right? You can't be the lone stander saying, I don't want that. You're going to have to. So you have to understand that your ownership is not singular. It's amongst a group of other people that own. And depending on how large that is, that could be a little unruly, right? So that's why it's important to really go to those association board meetings because they're going to make a determination how they're going to spend the money that's going to greatly affect you because that changes your fees. The other problem when you buy in a condominium, just to share this briefly, the reason that a lot of financing, especially FHA, VA are super hard in condominium is usually because of the investor percentage. Because if the investor percentage, investors to homeowners is too high, the problem is what if these investors stop paying, right? They're not living there. They don't have as much stake in the game. If they stop paying the association fees, what happens? You still got to pay them, right? Because the insurance, you have a huge umbrella insurance policy over the roofs, over the plumbing, over the electricity. It's not just a regular insurance policy. You have a much larger umbrella policy, which is why a lot of the condominium associations have much higher dues, right? A lot of that has to do with that insurance policy. So what happens is you can't not pay the insurance policy. You can't not pay the landscaper. You have to still pay these things. So who has to pick up the tab? The people who live there, right? And so this is the thing, they're scared that if there's too high a number of investors in there, that there's too much risk, they may stop paying those association fees and association fees can go through the roof. And they can add on tons of special assessments. Yes, they certainly can. So that's a big thing to keep in mind. That's also in the seller's disclosure, there's a lot of information in there about, for example, does the association have first right of refusal, right? Does anybody know what that is? First right of refusal? It's kind of like
if they go up for sale, they can make the first offer instead of you putting on the market.
Really what we've seen with the first right of refusal is they get to decide if they want to accept the buyers. They request to see the buyer's financials. And if they don't feel that that buyer is a worthy buyer, they can say no. So the buyer and seller can be in contract, but the association, if they have first right of refusal, could say no, and the seller has no recourse. It is a big problem in kind of co-ops in New York, I tell you that. They want to run your entire life, but condominiums can be the same. I don't see many down here that do have first right of refusal. They usually don't, but that's a big deal. If you see a condominium with the first right of refusal, it's not very good. Okay. Oh, the Alabama and Winter Park. Everybody watch out for that one. If you guys have that one. Okay. So let's take a quick peek at one of these things and let's just really look at what we're talking about. Now, a condominium rider is super important and it's going to break down things in a different way. Here, right here, the association's approval of the buyer is or is not required. If it says it's required, the seller just lost a lot of their opportunity to be in control of the sale, didn't they?
Yep.
Yep. First right of refusal. The association has or does not have first right of refusal. I like to see does not have, but sometimes you will see. These are really important. The members of the association have or do not have The right, have a right. If the members do not have a right, the contract is contingent upon the members within time permitting to exercise such right. These are horrible. Usually we do see no, but sometimes you got to know that this is important. The buyer and seller shall, within 5 days of the effective date, sign and deliver the required documents. Okay, let's talk about this. Whose job is it to provide the required documents? Yes, thank you, Rafe, the seller. So if it's your listing, you should have the articles of incorporation, the financials, the most recent financials. You need to have the condominium frequently asked questionnaire. You need to have those things already signed out, because if those appropriate documents are not given, this is another big thing. There is a 3-day right of rescission. So the condo, you want them to check that they have received these documents. Let's take a peek at this. At the very end, the buyer acknowledges they have been provided a current copy of the declarations, articles of incorporations, association bylaws and rules, a copy of the most recent year-end financials, and information on frequently asked questions. You see, this is exactly the things that you need. When they check this, that means they're starting their 3-day right of rescission. If this is checked, you know what that means? That means the right of rescission has not started yet. So that means that they could get to closing and say, you know what? Got all those documents. Can you give them to us? Yeah. And then you could say, crap, because you should have done that in the very beginning. Or you could say, well, they were in the MLS. This is why you need them to check and sign that they've received them. There's another thing also called the receipt of condo docs. It's here in the FAR bar one, but if there's another thing called a receipt of condo docs. So if this was checked B, then I would go back once you send it to them and make them sign receipt of condo docs. Because I have seen in many cases, investors putting bids out and all these different ones and waiting to the end to decide which ones they wanted to close on. And they use this little fun clause to get out and get their money back. It's a real thing. They have 3 days to decide if they agree with all of the terms. And if they don't, they get their money back. So, should what?
Should all of these be
Yes.
included?
Yes, but my point is absolutely. I would always suggest highly that when you have the listing, all these documents are in the MLS. That way, when they send you the offer, you can even check B to say, well, you have them, they're all in the MLS. Because the reality is, guys, a lot of times the agent on the other side has no clue. You know how many times I've seen a regular seller's disclosure on a condo? No condominium rider. I'm like, what are you selling? Are you selling a townhouse or are you selling a condo? Totally different. So those are super important. The other thing that's really important here, look, litigation. That's a big one. Celebration. I don't know if they ever finish that litigation. And it only affects, I think, the first floor, or it doesn't affect the first floor. It doesn't even affect all the floors. I can't remember now anymore. But if the condominium is in the middle of litigation, you've got to disclose that to the buyer. And if the buyer is trying to get financing, in a lot of cases, they won't get financing if there's litigation. So this is really important that that is filled in. Also, special assessments. Guys, if there's special assessments, like we were talking about, they're going to paint the outside of the building and change the landscaping. They've decided for 1 year, every homeowner is going to pay an extra of $300 a month. That stuff happens all the time. That's the stuff that they have to let us know that, and this is where we decide, are these assessments going to be paid in full by the seller, or are they going to pay them up until closing date and then the buyer will take over? All part of negotiation, but you've got to disclose that there are some, right? That's important. This is where they say they're not aware of any special assessments, right? But now here's important too. Fees, assessments, and prorations and litigation. So what are you paying? Are you paying monthly, quarterly, annually? What is it that you're paying? And if there's more than one association assessment, are you paying for 1 year, once a month for something else like painting and landscaping? Now, here's a question. In some instances, they charge you extra for recreation areas. They can break that down into a different assessment. So they can break down their fees any way they want to. It's really important that you understand the makeup of the fees when you're dealing with a condo. And the other thing that's really important is that you understand also if they're part of a greater association. So for example, you sell a condominium in Baldwin Park, they're part of a condo association, but they're also part of Baldwin Park Homeowners Association. So in that instance, you need 2 documents. You need the condominium rider, and you also need a homeowners association document. And Many cases, the homeowners association is also going to cause, require them to pay capital contribution, right? Because a lot of these, like Story Lake, I was just dealing with one with Rosanna, and they have a capital contribution. Laureate Park's capital contribution is like, that's a lot. It's like $5,000 or something. It's very high. So what a capital contribution is that they're trying to build reserves. So every time somebody moves in, they must pay money to build the reserves for the association. That's the idea. But you need to know, is there a capital contribution within the condominium? And if there's two associations, the condo association and the homeowners, is there a capital contribution associated with that one? Because these are the things that make closings fall apart, right? So this is the important thing. So this is why never, never, ever, never miss the condominium rider when you have a condo deal. This has got really, really important information in there. Everybody good about that? Any questions on that? Sweet.
Actually,
Yes.
an out-of-state legal client. And they emailed me last night asking for any negotiation information, etc.
Okay. You got to get it from,
So the MLS doesn't have, the listing doesn't have anything outside of the provider.
can you go to, you have to go to the listing agent and ask for all the documents.
Yeah, so it's okay to ask for that even before bringing it on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it.
What was the question?
So Rafe has got somebody who's interested in purchasing in the, what's it called again?
Alabama.
The Alabama, which by the way has first right of refusal, right? So the buyer would like to see all of those documents prior to even putting in an offer. And so his question is, it's not in the MLS. My suggestion is absolutely call the listing agent. Now, sometimes guys, you need to know that the association may not even talk to the listing agent, because the listing agent is not a member of the association, right? The member of the association is the seller.
Is the owner.
Yeah, so sometimes that's why when you're taking a listing in a condo, you want to get that stuff as soon as possible, because if these associations, which they can be a huge pain in the neck, are going to act like that, you may need to assist the seller sending emails. The seller sends the email so that they'll give authority to give you the information. It's a pain, but you've got to do that because they can, right? Because you're not a member of that association, only the seller is. So yes, I would definitely contact them. The other thing is a lot of times associations are charging a couple $100s for the frequently required questions, the frequently asked questions, but lenders will require that, right? Because that's got the information they need to know when they're building out that loan. So I've seen agents actually pay out of their own pocket for that. Don't do that. I hate
Carrie,
don't do that.
who is responsible, even though, isn't that the lender, the title company that requests the condo questionnaire and charges the seller for it?
So the great question. Yes, it should be charged by at closing to the seller. However, in some instances, depending on, for example, if it's a VA building, there are some VAs, there is a website for VA administration approved condos. So on there, it'll tell you which ones have the approval, and they may actually have those condo things, frequently asked condos filled out already, the questionnaires. So sometimes you can go direct. Other times they'll say, well, we need to pay for that right away. So it has to be prepaid. So in what instances, we've had cases where the buyers pay for it up front, and then we say at credit at closing. We have done that too. It's never good. The seller should be doing it. Absolutely, I agree with you. But sometimes because with depending when the lender needs that, we can't wait. And if the title company hasn't done it yet, right, we need to get it as soon as possible. Otherwise, we can't get the lender on board to give the loan. So especially in a VA situation where that loan may take 45 days to begin with, now you've got condo docs dealing with all that, it could take even longer. So I have seen, but yes, to your question, Jules, the best thing to do is absolutely the title company should be on top of that. But if not, I would, right from the beginning, I would go to the association and ask for all those things up front, or ask the title company you work with to request them right up front.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Great questions. All right. Homeowners Association. Does anybody have a question on the Homeowners Association addenda? There might be one thing I want to take a quick peek at. Now, we know the Homeowners Association is also listed in frequently used addendas. Everybody knows that they have that folder. But I want to take a look. Homeowners. Oh, did I spell it wrong? I can't even see it. It's so tiny. Oh yeah. That's fine. I'm sorry? A capital contribution. Yeah, that's in a lot of things. Okay, homeowners association, FAR bar, homeowners association, CRISP. Just wanted to pull that up to show you guys that. A lot of these frequently used addendas have both in here. So if you're not paying attention, it's very simple. I've seen on so many occasions, especially the VA, FHA one, where they use the wrong one, and guess what? The lender's gonna kick it back to you because it doesn't match the contract. Also, the CRISP one doesn't give half the information that the VA, the FHA, VA one does for the FAR bar. So, okay, so we're gonna use the right one, which by the way is already uploaded into our frequently used listing docs, but we're gonna take a quick peek at it. And I wanted to point out two things on this. We changed this probably a year and a half ago, might be longer now, to add a second page. The second page is crucial that this is filled out because first of all, it does tell you if the association, if the buyer, for example, let's look at an approval. If the association approval of this transaction or the buyer is required, this contract is contingent upon the association approval. So in some very, very rare cases, even a homeowners association can approve a buyer. They may have to, that is very uncommon, but in some instances, that's why it's in there, okay? But this is the most important thing. This page up here talks about what are the regular fees that they're paying, right? How much are they paying for the homeowners association? Are there any special assessments? They've decided to add landscaping in front of the thing and they're gonna, instead of adding it to their reserves, they're gonna go ahead and have every homeowner give $100 for a year or whatever. That's what they're asking for here, okay? Now, this one, there may be an obligation to pay rent or land use fees for recreational or other common facilities within. So there are some cases where they may charge you separately for recreation. Here's one, the Villages. The Villages has a recreation fee. The Villages have a homeowners association fee. The Villages also has a CDD, but they don't call it that. They call it the bond. It's very, very funny. Yes. The bond. What is a CDD? Excellent. Thank you for asking, Rafe. A CDD is called a community development district. So in large communities, Baldwin Park, Avalon Park, Laureate Park, a lot of parks, right? I noticed a lot of Story Park, a lot of parks, but also the Villages. What happens is when they go to build it, it's such, I mean, land development, guys, is really expensive. And land development is putting in all the underground electric, all the underground waterways, all of that stuff to get the land sites ready to go and sell to builders is costly. So oftentimes in these large communities, that they did is they took out a surety bond, which is why the Villages call it the bond. And they usually take it with the state or the county or the city, that kind of thing. And this will go to be used to put in the infrastructure for the community. And there's two parts to it. There's one that's a fixed cost. That fixed cost will end at a certain period of time. 25 years, 20 years. And then there's a maintenance cost to it that will be continued ongoing. What's different about a CDD and a homeowners association fee is, again, it's for the infrastructure. It's for the lights that are up there. It's for the ponds that they keep up with. There's, there's the roadways, right? That's what the CDD is for. It's charged on your tax bill. It is not charged direct to an association. You pay the CDD as part of your taxes, right? That's typically how you see it. So in the Villages, they don't care about the regular maintenance portion. They all want to know how much of that surety bond, that 20, I think it's a 25-year bond there. How much of that bond did you pay? How many years left do you have on the bond? Like, that's a big deal. And so this is where it gets important to understand what they're talking about here. And this, the obligation to use other amenities, that is actually part of a homeowners association fee, but they call it an activities fee at the Villages. So they can break these fees up, but you got to understand what they are so that you can fill this out properly. Now here, assessments, and we're going to talk about this, but a capital contribution, again, is to usually build the reserves for the association. A lot of communities have them. So even though when you were the first person you bought from the builder, you paid that, right? When you sell it, some in cases like Laureate Park, the seller has to pay it again and the buyer pays it. Yeah, it's a little crazy. It keeps you coming and going at Laureate Park. So in some communities, that capital contribution can be both to the seller again and the buyer. So this is why when you're taking a listing, you want to talk to the seller about that if it's in one of these communities, because that could be a big difference too. When the seller's like, what the heck is this? I'm not going to pay. Yeah, I didn't plan another $5,000 cutting into my net profit, right? So also 2 years is capital gains, right? We all know 2 years. If you don't, have your property for 2 years, what has to happen? It won't be applicable for the capital gains tax benefit, right? Which for an individual is 250,000 and 500,000 for a couple. Does everybody know what I talk about when I'm talking about capital gains? If you don't, please tell me because I'll explain it.
Yes, could you please elaborate? And thank
Sure.
you, ma'am.
I'm not an accountant. There's that. My mother-in-law is. I can get her on the phone. Anyway, you guys will love her. She's fabulous. Okay, I'll send you information. But this is the situation. Capital gains means if it's a primary residence, if you are a single person who owns a primary residence, if the gain on that property is 250 or less, you do not have to pay any taxes on it. If the gain is more, let's say you bought this, it was a flip, you got it really cheap, you renovated, you made it beautiful, and you're making 300,000 on it, but you're a single person, you will pay taxes on 50 grand. The difference between the 250 and the 50. As a couple, you have 500,000. So if you, but it's on the gain, not on the purchase price, right? And that's the important thing. The capital, they're talking right now. This is one of the things that really scares too, because capital gains tax is right now, I think 23%. I'm not quite sure. They were talking about bringing up to 28%. I heard something rumblings, maybe in the 30s. It could be a huge deal in our world if that capital tax changes, for sure. So you guys should be aware of that. I know they're talking about different policy right now where they want to increase it. That's not good for us. Okay, nobody really wants, that's what a 1031 like-kind exchange is about. When it's not your primary residence, you're taking all the gain and you're putting it into a new property, therefore not paying any tax on it, waiting to pay the taxes when you sell that property or you move it again. So these are things that, but you can't do that on a primary residence. So on the primary residence, you want to wait 2 years so you can take that tax benefit of not having to pay taxes on a gain of 250 if you're single or 500 if you're married. Everybody got it?
On the profit of the
Profit.
sale, if you buy for 100,000 and you sell for 600,000, so if you made 500,000, that's where you pay. But if you make anything less than that, there is no such a thing as taxes. Penalty.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Thank you. Okay,
But only
thank you.
if you wait 2 years. If you don't wait 2 years, you're paying it. Now, to the point of the association, many associations have written in their documents that you have to wait like a year. This is a typical one. If you sell before that, there's penalties and fees. So that's another thing. Lauria Park, you have to wait, I think at least a year. It could be 2 years, but I think it's 1 year at Lauria Park. So a lot of these communities and homeowners associations have that built in too. So you need to know if you're going to sell it prior to that end date that they give you, which again, oftentimes they see a year. What ends up happening is now you have to pay penalties and fees that you did not, the homeowner's not aware of. Because I guarantee you when they sold it, they didn't really go over that. They skimmed over all of that good stuff, right? So this is important, that this little part here is really gives you an opportunity to sit and talk to the seller about the possibilities of other fees and things that they may have to pay, the seller may have to pay, the buyer may have to pay. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So let's say you get the listing like last July.
Okay.
Let's say you get the listing like last July, and all of a sudden there's a new special assessment charged by the HOA. It didn't come in, you didn't know about it in July. However, you still have the listing. The homeowners or the, whatever, they haven't said anything. Could there be a repercussion later? And then also, how do we stay up to date on the special assessments throughout the time that the listing period is?
Some great questions. You guys all hear it? If you go and you get a listing, say in July, and then somewhere in that listing, they add on some special assessments. Now the seller knows because they're notified. Even if they don't go to meetings, which they probably don't, they're notified. So they're aware, they just may not tell you or may not read their mail, right? But they have been notified. So what happens is, this is the good thing, you're not actually held liable for that, but could it totally stop a sale? Yes. So will it affect you in the long run anyway? Yes. You're not going to be held liable that you should have known, and you're not even a member of the association, right? It's really the seller. That's why we can't really totally control the seller. We wish we could, but it definitely can cause the sale to fall apart. Yeah, great questions. That's the other thing. That's why you have to give all great contact information, because again, in the MLS, you should always say that the buyer's agent should have to confirm all of these details, because you've given them the information, you've given them the contacts, let them do their job too. It's not only on you. It's really supposed to be the buyer who's supposed to be checking it out. Again, we know oftentimes they won't talk to anybody, but we're trying everything we can to open that line of communication up. That's the point. Okay, any questions about homeowners association? We go with that one?
I have a question.
Sure, hit me, Jen.
Hi. So I know you said the condo docs are the responsibility of the seller to get
Yep.
those over. Are the HOA docs also the responsibility of like seller/listing agent? Because it always says that it's responsibility of the buyer's agent to verify. I always feel like listing agents try to push that onto me.
They always try to push that onto you. And you can say they can verify it, but they have to give you the information to do so, but they should have given you the documents to begin with.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely. And the reason they say the verify thing is to talk about what Carrie just said, just in case something has changed and they weren't kept abreast, right? That's why they're trying to push off the liability. But a lot of listing agents are lazy and they don't want to even go get the docs. And so this is the problem. It's not the buyer's or the buyer's agent responsibility to provide the documents. Per the contract, it says the seller has to provide it. Actually, per that document we just looked at, it says it's the seller's responsibility that we read through, remember? It is the seller's responsibility to provide the documents because they're the only ones a member of the association.
There's so many great agents out there that
I
I
know.
had to chase some down.
Yeah.
You guys like, I don't even have them. I'm like, you're the HOA guy. How do you know?
Tracy said she got talked to an HOA guy. He didn't even have them.
He goes, "Oh, we just moved offices and I don't know where they are." I'm like, "Well, I kinda need you."
Well, another good thing is a lot of these things are online. They have online portals where the documents live. So that's another really good thing. And search through other, I'm not surprised in that instance. That instance sounded crazy. Well, there, it was Leesburg. Guys, we get it now. Like we're all there. Okay. Okay. Seller financing. This is not an addendum that we need to spend a lot of time on, but it has happened. So if the sellers are going to do any kind of financing, do not just write the terms under additional terms. Buyer, seller agree, buyer's gonna pay this much a month to the seller until they do not do that. Are you guys mortgage brokers too? No. That's what the seller financing addenda is for. It breaks it down. How are they doing it? Is there a balloon payment? How long is it? So if you get to that point where you need assistance, give me a call. I'm happy to go through it with you, but do not go rogue on seller financing and start writing that stuff in there. This very, very delicate information, even if you provided an amortization schedule, if it wasn't from a bank, you could be held liable for that. And you're not licensed as a mortgage broker. Remember, if you say it, you own it. So a lot of times I've got some really wonderful caring agents that want to provide all this fabulous information. No, be very, very careful. You say that you're now responsible for that. Can you give them a link to a great site, to South State Bank? Yes. Can you give them a link to a tax thing about 1031 like-kind exchange? Yes, but we can have some knowledge, but a little bit of knowledge can sometimes be dangerous. So just be very careful that you don't try to take control of this information and start giving them all sorts of stuff without sourcing and giving them a direct source to go to. Make sense? Mortgage assumption. Never been a thing I've seen. First of all, after the crash, no banks can probably allow anybody to assume a mortgage. And today, why would you do? The rates are so low. So, but a mortgage assumption, if we ever get there, let me know. FHA VA financing is a big one that you use the proper one. That is a crisp one, and it's another one. So I would put in here, see if you put in FHA, like take a peek. Federal Housing Administration. If you write too much, what happens is you don't get them both. So this one's a FAR bar and this one's a crisp. I just want to show you this briefly. The crisp one is super short. This will always get kicked back by any decent lender. They're going to say this is the wrong addenda, but you don't want to do that because that's going to delay your closing. This is a one page. See this? It's the wrong one. We know it's wrong because it's a crisp one, but it does not even incorporate the right information for us. So you need this one, again, FAR bar, 2 pages. That's a big note to yourself that you know you have the right one. And here we are, Federal Housing Administration. Couple things I want to go through that people get really confused on. So inspection and appraisal. This is different than anything you might have negotiated into the contract already. This is in addition to, you're not reiterating what's in the contract. Let's say you said that the seller will pay, it's a regular residential contract, he'll pay $2,000 in general warranty repairs, $2,000 in WDO, and $500 in permits. You're not putting 2,000, 5,000, you're not adding it all up here. Listen, if I was a listing agent, I would kick that back in a second. What they're asking here is if, when they have the appraisal, the appraiser says, we need these things repaired, this is an additional amount to cover that. So typically I usually keep it in 300, you know. I mean, I have not seen, I would hope the inspector would have caught it, right? You have to have, especially in a VA inspector is very detailed, and there's a special pool of VA inspectors. But again, I would put a couple $100 there. I've not seen anything really huge there. Here's another one while we're on the topic of VA. Is the seller required in the state of Florida to pay for the WDO inspection for a VA buyer?
Depend on the lender.
Jen, you're so good. You get my star today. It depends on the lender, because per the VA administration, there are 13 states, it is required a WDO, but there are 13 states that do not require the seller to pay for it. And oddly enough, Florida is one of those states. So in the state of Florida, it is not a requirement by the VA administration that the seller pay for it. However, with that said, the problem is that many of these lenders are national, USAA, Navy Federal, and so they have something called an overlay in which they will require that the seller pay for it. So does that mean you can't negotiate it? No, you can, but you've got to be aware that that may come up. And it's going to actually say here under VA, fees, prepayments, seller shall pay for the WDO inspection and tax services, which I've never seen tax services, underwriting and document preparation were fees required by the lender. So you see, by signing this, they're agreeing to pay for it. So to my point, if your seller was like, no, 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 and you want to negotiate this, you're going to have to cross it out of here too. Because if you don't, this is going to supersede the contract where he said he's not going to pay for it, right? This is something you need to be very, very clear about. Mike McFadden from Hero Inspections, though, either does free or definitely discounted WDO inspections for VA, for veterans. Mike McFadden from Hero Inspections. He's a veteran. So highly recommend that. Okay, now, if you're doing an FHA loan, not a VA, obviously you're just checking this box. This is important to understand. Right here, it says that, let's go into it. What they're allowing you here is the dollar amount. So here you're saying that if it is expressly agreed and outstanding the provisions of the contract, the purchaser shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property or incur any penalty by forfeiture of their earnest deposit money. Otherwise, unless the purchase has been given in accordance with FHA VA requirements, written statement, blah, 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 blah. So with setting forth the appraised value of the property is not less than, this is the purchase price. So what they're saying under FHA is that they will not have to pay any money less than the purchase price. You have to write the purchase price in there because it doesn't say that. If you leave this blank, you did not cover your buyer, right? But now they can get their money back if in fact it does not appraise. Where this is really, really important is with the new builder, because new home builders will try to make the buyer still pay. But if they sign this document, which the lender will require if it's FHA or VA, this will supersede that and they will have to give them their money back. We had to fight D.R. Horton on a VA one. It was crazy. So this is important. So don't leave blanks. You know, I'm always about that, but especially here because this does not say if left blank the purchase price. It says not less than blank. If it's blank, what does that mean? Zero. That means that you didn't protect your buyer. If you didn't fill that in, the buyer will have to pay the difference or they will lose their money. So make sure you fill that in. Again, the purchase shall pay a loan expenses except for tax fees if charged by the buyer's lender and pay a seller up to a maximum of. So right here, this is saying the seller will pay some extra loan fees. You could say 0 here. I haven't seen a lot of loan fees that the FHA is going to require that the seller pay. But this is, again, in addition to anything you agreed upon in the contract. These are all extra things. Okay. Now, if it's VA, this is very funny. So it says right here, if the contract purchase price or cost exceeds the reasonable value of the property as established by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, because again, they have to have special VA appraisers, right? The purchaser shall have, however, the privilege and option of proceeding with the consummation of this contract without regard to the amount of the reasonable value. So what is that saying? It's saying essentially they can get their money back if it doesn't appraise, but they also can pay the difference. They have the right and privilege to pay the difference. So if you have a buyer in this particular environment and the guy's a VA and they say, listen, we'll still pay above. If it doesn't come in at the appraised value, we'll pay it. This does not negate that. A lot of agents think it does because under FHA, it's very clear that it's the purchase price. Here it does say very clearly the VA, the vet, is able to pay more if he wants to. Okay, it's not like he can't get the loan. He still can get the loan. That is important if you're going in on a multiple offer situation. And you can let them know he's got cash. If this doesn't appraise, he will be willing to pay some more.
Is that out of pocket or?
Out of pocket. Out of pocket. But again, in today's market where people are, it's really hard to get a deal, right? Because there's so little inventory, especially if you're representing a VA. People might be like, oh, I don't want to deal with the inspection. Oh, I don't want to deal with, you know, any of the property related issues. And oh no, what if it doesn't appraise? Well, forget it. We're already too high. I'm not taking a VA. That is wrong. I could understand it on an FHA all day long. A VA, and that's why you got to talk to your buyer. You got to say, listen, it's a really crazy market. How do you feel if the price, the 500 that you're coming in at, appraises for 490? Would you pay the difference? You know, these are conversations to have because that can make it break a difference with the deal that you're putting in the offer on. So that's why I'm bringing that to your attention. It's very important. A lot of agents don't understand.
That's why the wife didn't want you to talk to anybody.
You only put that if your buyer was willing to.
Of course, no, here it's already built in, but you would only say that to the agent if they actually were willing to pay it. Absolutely. You're not going to say to the buyers, the listing agent, yeah, they'll pay it, and then they won't, right? Like, you don't want to do that.
You know what I mean is like, because that gives them a VA option.
They have to do this form. This is a required document. A VA lender will require this document, and FHA lender will require this document. It must be signed. This doesn't say that they have to pay the difference. It says they have the right and privilege to do so if they choose. It's still protected. They still have a financing and appraisal contingency, but they can pay the extra. And I think that's where the confusion comes in. People think they can't because it's 0% financing. Just because it's a VA and it's a 0% financing does not mean that that's not a qualified buyer. It does not mean that that buyer doesn't have money. We have closed VAs over 1 million, 1.25. Did you close one that high?
No.
Okay.
We had the VA appraisal issue
Oh,
where they did not
yeah.
count one entire room in the house. She
Oh,
came
yeah,
back to remeasure it and said, I'm still not changing it.
Yeah. Appraisers are never fun. So true. But we tried. Okay. All right. That is the FHA VA. Appraisal contingency addendum. If you do not have an FHA or VA, if you are conventional, if you are some kind of portfolio loan, I highly recommend using an appraisal contingency. However, in today's interesting market, what can be done on appraisal contingency? If your buyer says, listen, let's say you know the purchase price is 500, that seems like a reasonable price, but we're already at 510. And he really wants that house. You could do an appraisal contingency for 500 and come in at 510. What does that say? That says he'll pay the difference if it comes in at 500, but it has to come in at least at 500, right? That is a good way to try to secure your buyer to get that with an appraisal contingency because you're showing the strength of the buyer. You're saying, listen, they're willing to pay above appraisal, but it must appraise for at least this much, right?
But some people right now are saying, in like, for offers, not accepting appraisal.
I know some people are saying not accepting appraisal contingencies. However, this is where you as an agent could speak to your buyer, could speak to the listing agent, say, I understand you're not accepting appraisal contingencies. How about if we go for 500 as the appraisal contingency, which is their loan amount, but they'll pay anything above that. Would your seller consider that? That is time to pick up the phone and really have a conversation, right? You can't expect that if you're sending these things in, that the listing agents are even, highlighting it to the seller. How many sellers do you think can really understand these offers that are coming in? No, I like hardly any, right? So it's really imperative that the listing agent understands. I mean, I have heard instances, I don't even want to tell, where listing agents are saying, oh yeah, I didn't submit this because I knew it was too low. That is not allowable. You have to submit every offer, right? But do we know that this is happening? I do. Okay, so this is why it's imperative you pick up the phone and you speak to the listing agent. This is also why it's imperative to create really good relationships within our industry, because who never know when you're working on the other side with that person, if they're like, oh, it's Carrie, she's fabulous, I love working with her. Don't think when they're presenting your offer to that seller, they're not like, oh, by the way, their agent's fabulous. I feel really confident we work with Carrie, we're gonna get to the closing table. But now Beverly, I don't know anything about her, right? Like that stuff happens, right? And in some instances, it's really the listing agent helping the seller, because you might say, listen, I know you love this offer. This is a brand new agent. I don't know what they're gonna know. This is a secure agent. They're very, very similar offers. I'm just gonna say, totally your choice. But I know, and I feel confident, I've worked with Carrie before. She does a great job getting things to the closing table. I don't know Beverly, she's a brand new agent. I don't know if she's gonna get this to the closing table. Your choice, pick one. I mean, they're gonna say stuff like that, right? So that's why it's really, really important to be able to pick up the phone, have a conversation, be able to tell them where the financing's at. You have to really be knowledgeable today when you're talking to that listing agent, because that will be the difference between possibly getting a deal and not, right? Okay.
Carrie,
Yes.
it's Carolyn. Can I ask just a quick question? So
Sure.
on representing seller, offer in, there is appraisal contingency. Say the house doesn't appraise, but the seller is willing to come down. What is the next step? Like, what's the appropriate paperwork to put that all in place?
That's a blank addendum, my friends.
Okay.
And it's buyer and seller agree the new purchase price of the home is XYZ. All other terms and conditions remain in full force and effect.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. The all other terms and conditions, that still does seem a little bit like, but everybody says it on TV and everything else too, but it's in the contract in so many places. You're not really writing, acting as an attorney, but it's important that people understand that just because you're changing the purchase price doesn't mean you're changing anything else. So I would definitely add that in there. And if you ever have a difficult addendum to write, that's why we go to Phil, because he is an attorney and he will write them for us for free. Thank you, Phil. And I do have clauses in a dot loop already for things that he's written that have come up on multiple occasions. Like, for example, a discount in lieu of repairs. There is specific legal wording in dot loop under clauses that's written up. Yeah. Yep. So when I see situations like that happen and I go to Phil and I get him to write something legal, listen, that's allowable all day long, because I didn't write it. You didn't write it. Phil wrote it. If anybody asks where they come from, Phil Logus, lawyer. He's licensed. We're not. So yeah, it's under clauses. Okay. Homeowners flood insurance. That's not something we deal with often. I know, my gosh, I think we're gonna have to do addendums section 2 next week. What do you guys think? Because there's so many more. Interest-bearing account. That is when you're keeping your escrow in an interest-bearing account. I don't typically see that, but where do you see that oftentimes? Sometimes when you're not using a title company, if it gives a kind of some weird deals, but yeah, also if it's a builder. So this is the thing, if a builder does not have a builder contract, I've seen this, it's crazy, and they want you to use one of our contracts, which does not apply to building, right? Because it says, unless it's a house that's ready to go, but if it's a to be built, builders contracts will say the home has to be built within 2 years. There's a lot of language in there, but you know what else they say? That the money will be held in a working capital fund, because they're going to use that deposit to start ordering the materials and pay for the, the vendors and all of that. So if it's in an escrow account, they can't touch it. So it's a really weird. So sometimes I've seen builders use the interest-bearing account, which is really weird too. And then they're taking the interest. It's messy. So just be aware if it is a builder and the builder's like, well, just give us an offer. just be aware that where's the escrow going? Make sure it really truly is an escrow account, because if it's a working capital fund and they're not disclosing that, that is a potential, I don't want to say liability, but it is, right? Because if that builder went out of business, how does the buyer get their deposit back? Remember that fund I told you about? That's where they go for that too. And you know, sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't, sometimes it's partial. We don't know. All right. So we are at 11:05. My suggestion is next week, same time, same bat channel, we come back and we hit some more of these fabulous addendas. Do we have some people in agreement?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to say thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, addendas are a big deal, and we want to make sure that we're using them properly. So make sure that you are, whenever there's a thought about adding in verbiage, always check that second to last page of a contract and see if there's an addendum for it, right? Because if there's an addendum for it, use the addendum. Type in the words just as they're written into Florida Interactive Forms. Make sure it's the FAR bar version, not the crisp version. Use the addendum every time. Because if you wrote in the house must appraise, it means nothing. If you write in the house must appraise for the purchase price, it still means nothing, right? Because it's not saying what's going to happen if it doesn't. So the appraisal contingency, for example, says many other things about if it doesn't appraise and when it has to appraise by, and there's timeframes and what happens next and second steps. If you just write in your own, this has to happen. Like, for example, this home is contingent on the seller selling their home. What does that mean? Nothing. There's a home to sell contingency. You've got to make sure you're really using the addendums that have been created for you by attorneys. All right, guys. Well, I'm excited that we covered as much as we did. Thank you all for joining. And next week, it'll be addendums day 2. Have a good one, guys.
Bye. Thank you.